Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. This is Andrew LeBlanc. This is the start of training on OCFO's audit process. I'm Andrew LeBlanc. Sue Perkins will be assisting me, and we'll be doing a training today on OCFO's process and the agency-wide process for audit management. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got a lot of choices for the training, so appreciate your coming to this one. And Sue and I will introduce ourselves in more detail in a moment, but just wanted to give you our objectives for this training. So our first goal is for new folks, maybe new to the audit process, who want to learn something new, just get their feet wet and have a bit of an introduction. Our hope is to provide some general information that can assist you. You know, we all work for the taxpayer. We all do work that is auditable at some point or another. So it can be a complex process. There's a lot of moving parts, lots of variables, but we're going to do our best to kind of demystify the process and hopefully give you something that you can take away from this session. Our second goal for this training is really for the audit follow-up coordinators and GAO liaisons who are deeply involved in a daily basis in doing audit follow-up work. So we'll talk about the Sharepoint site that OCFO has developed, and we'll give some information that's more specific to the audit community and can help them do their jobs more effectively and more efficiently. And I'm remiss in mentioning that as you guys have questions, please type them in the chat box. I see some names coming up right now. We've got monitors who are looking at the incoming questions. We'll take those questions and address them towards the end of the presentation, but keep them coming throughout the presentation. If we can address them as they come up, we'll handle them, but if not, we'll address them at the very end. So Sue and I both work for OCFO's Office of the Controller. Oh, thank you for that comment, Beverly. I'm moving closer here. I'll speak a little louder. Okay. What we do is we support the CFO, who has delegated authority for the audit process at EPA. So we support the Chief Financial Officer directly. We also support the agency's AFCs and GAO liaisons. Again, my name is Andrew LeBlanc, and I work on the OIG side of the equation, so dealing specifically with OIG audits. And I've been at EPA for 14 years, all of which has been in OCFO. I've spent several years leading the agency's internal control process. I've also been on the other side of the audit process, having to defend the agency's programs, specifically the improper payment audit, an annual OIG audit. So I come at this position of the agency's audit follow-up coordinator role from with that perspective in mind. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sue to introduce herself and to give us more of a heads up as to where we're going to be heading with this presentation.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sue Perkins. I cover the GAO side of things as the agency's GAO liaison. I joined EPA this past February, so just prior to our extended telework. I've not really had the opportunity to meet most of you, but I certainly look forward to a time when we are all together again and I can do that. I've been in the audit community for about 10 years. Most of that time was with the Department of Homeland Security. At the Transportation Security Administration, I initially held the role of AFC and GAO liaison in their Office of Information Technology. And then I transitioned over to the same role at the agency level. So sort of what Andrew and I do right now, working for the Chief of Staff there for another few years. And then following that time at TSA, I went to spend a couple years with the DHS Office of Inspector General. So I flipped over to the other side and worked at the IG. But my most recent experience was with the General Services Administration, where I coordinated an effort to incorporate GAO and OIG audit findings and recommendations into that organization's approach to enterprise risk management. So I share all of this as a means to convey that I've been on all sides of this audit equation, and I'm really hoping that today's session can help to clarify things about the process for all of you. As Andrew mentioned earlier, everyone's work is auditable, and each of us may eventually participate in an audit engagement. And I know from experience that can be an unnerving experience at first when we're on the receiving end of auditor questions. And you know, in my brief time at EPA, I know that our employees are passionate about our work, and rightfully so. So when someone questions that effort, it might be a natural inclination to feel a little bit defensive. But just keep in mind it's never personal. And I firmly believe that, you know, in an ideal world, the audit function really can be the best of good government. It can help our programs run more smoothly and efficiently, and it can maximize the use of scarce taxpayer resources. And I do think that in some cases, you know, sharing our good story with a neutral, objective third party can even bring out our programs, you know, some positive publicity. So now that I've convinced you all that audit participation is something to be celebrated and not feared, let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda for today. All right, so we're going to start off with an overview of oversight bodies, so EPA's Office of the Inspector General, the OIG, and then the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO. Then we'll take a look at the primary EPA guidance, you know, how do we know what we're doing throughout the process. Take a look at EPA's audit network. I know we've got some of our AFCs and GAO liaisons on the phone today, as well as some of our subject matter experts. So we'll show you the who's who and where you fit in that. Take a look at OIG and GAO audit phases. They're similar, a little bit different, but you know, we'll cover where all of that takes place and what the timeframes are, and then a look at corrective actions. So if you receive recommendations from GAO or OIG, you know, what do we do there? And then Eems, the Enterprise Audit Management System. It's our new system within OCFO. We're pretty excited about the rollout, so we'll talk about that. Monthly metrics and reporting, not everybody's favorite part, but certainly something that helps improve the process. And then our OIG GAO Audit Community Sharepoint Site. We rolled that out recently, and we're very excited to share that with you. I think it's going to be a useful tool. We'll share our contact information for OCFO's audit team. And then, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we'll take questions at the end. But certainly as we go along, if you've got some questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box. Our acting branch manager is also, our branch chief is also on the line, and she may be able to answer those as we go along. So just to kind of get a sense of who is in the audience today, we're going to do a quick poll. So Nikki, if you can slide that over. And I'd like everyone to just take a look at the poll and let us know what's your role in the audit community. So either yes, I am an audit follow-up coordinator. Yes, I am a GAO liaison. Yes, I am a subject matter expert. Or no, I just love audits. And I'm sure all of you love audits, so that applies equally. But certainly if you fill one of the other roles, let us know. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And Andrew, it looks like your community really showed up today. All right, so I'm going to do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then Nikki, if you can go ahead and end the poll, we'll see where we're at. Okay, so it looks like the majority of folks on the line today are AFCs. We have a few GAO liaisons, a couple subject matter experts, and then a few future subject matter experts, folks that just love audits right now but are getting ready to participate in future ones. All right, thanks, Nikki.
Great, thank you, Sue.
Okay, and I'll turn it back over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, thank you. And this is just a brief slide on the Office of Inspector General. A lot of the AFCs already know this. This may be not terribly helpful for you, but for the new folks, the OIG has the authority for conducting audits, inspections, evaluations, and investigations at EPA, and their purpose is to make recommendations that helps the agency to carry out its functions in the most efficient and effective way possible, really to guard against fraud, waste, and abuse. So since any of us can really be subject to audit, whether now or in the future, it's helpful to have an idea of the process to kind of demystify the process a bit, and that's what I think Sue's been great at doing here for us. The OIG is part of EPA, but it's really independent of EPA at the same time, where the IG has its own budget, its own appropriations, and its own resources. So they try to be neutral and objective, and while we don't always agree with OIG findings and they don't always agree with our corrective actions, there's a negotiation process, a process for reaching agreement on different corrective actions and how to approach them. So the IG is mostly self-initiates their audits, but an audit can be initiated through other means as well, whether at the request of the agency or a congressional request, even a hotline complaint, or something in the news could really be the start of an audit. So the OIG generally has broad discretion over what they're going to look at, what programs they audit, the scope of their work, the timing of their audits. So they do have, again, a lot of independence from EPA, and it's our job to hopefully incorporate the recommendations that they make and try to improve our processes as the audits come through. And then just lastly, the OIG does have a reporting process back to Congress. They have a semi-annual report every fall and spring, and that's the IG's way of reporting out how well EPA is doing in addressing the corrective actions or the recommendations that were issued. And I should mention that the IG is not just at EPA. There's an Inspector General at every agency, so this is a process that every agency goes through, and for the purpose of the semi-annual reporting, we obviously it's an incentive for us to do as well as possible in terms of closing out corrective actions and addressing OIG recommendations. With that, I'll turn it back over to Sue to talk about GAO.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So unlike OIGs, which fall under the executive branch, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, is part of the legislative branch of the federal government. It's an independent agency that serves as the audit, evaluation, and investigative arm of Congress. So when you hear about Congress's watchdog, that's GAO. The majority of GAO engagements are in response to congressional requests or required by statute. A lot of times it's built into law that GAO needs to take a look at certain things. Like with the CARES Act recently, they have a big role in reporting back to Congress. They're a relatively large organization, but their mission covers nearly the entirety of the federal space, so there's very little room for them to do discretionary work. Every once in a while, a passion project will pop up, but it's mostly at the behest of Congress. So engaging with GAO is a little different from conversations with OIG. Auditors should work through your office's GAO liaisons. So OIG may ask to speak with you privately. It might be part of a whistleblower complaint or something like that. But you can always have someone with you if you're engaging with GAO. If you want counsel there or some of your leadership, that's perfectly fine. So EPA's leadership has a strong interest in what we share with GAO. So you'll find that OCIR and OGC regularly participate in interviews, and they review document submissions prior to delivery to auditors. And that's really so that we can ensure that we have a clear and consistent message when it comes to Congress. All right, so Andrew?
Thanks, Sue. This slide's talk about the EPA primary guidance that addresses both OIG and GAO audits, and we'll see this on the Sharepoint site when we get there as well as we make these documents available. But for the OIG side, the primary guidance document is Epa Manual 2750. It's called the Audit Management Procedures. It's a very extensive document that it's something like 200 pages in length, and it really goes into a lot of detail about the entire OIG audit process. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, that has gone into it. So it's an extensive document that covers the audit process from A to Z, and it addresses the different types of audits that are available. It talks about the role of the OIG versus the agency's role and sort of the responsibilities of each. agency response timeframes. I mean, so it really goes into a lot, and it's something that I refer to frequently when there are questions that come up. And so it's the agency standard guidance for how to manage the audit response process. And I think it's helpful for new AFCs in particular to become familiar with the document. It would be very hard to digest in one sitting, but as different situations arise, 2750 really answers a lot of questions that come up. So we are making that available on the Sharepoint site. With that, Sue will talk about the GAO side.
Thanks. So EPA's primary document for GAO is the Audit Process SOP, the Standard Operating Procedure. And as it indicates on the slide, it establishes roles and responsibilities for audit liaisons and the audit management and follow-up at EPA. And until recently, we didn't have a formal guidance document explicitly outlining these roles. So many folks at EPA stick around for so long because it really is such a great place to work that there's sort of an established process, but now it's been memorialized. And in our conversations with the GAO liaisons, we received feedback that it really would be a good idea. So we rolled this out last month and released it in conjunction with the audit community's Sharepoint site. The document focuses specifically on the audit process, and it aligns with OMB Circular 850.
Okay, and this slide is an overview of EPA's audit network. It's not a comprehensive slide, but just gives you an idea of who's who and really how the two processes are very similar. So on the left side of the slide, we have OIG audits. On the right side, GAO audits. And the central column identifies a lot of key commonalities between the two types. The first box on each side is for the CFO, again, because the CFO has the delegated authority for overseeing the agency's audit process. And then Sue and I would be the next level down, the second box, where I'm the audit follow-up coordinator for the agency, and Sue is the agency's GAO liaison. So we support the CFO in making sure that the process runs smoothly by providing guidance, by helping to interpret guidance, and we also support the AFC community and the GAO liaisons in their work. So what we hope to provide through the Sharepoint site is additional tools and resources.
Okay, so this here is the OIG and GAO audit phases. So they're largely similar, few notable exceptions. Some of the timeframes differ. Document submissions to GAO undergo a more extensive review process. Senior leadership, OCIR, OGC, and OP are engaged throughout the GAO process. And then the recommendation and corrective action closeout is approached a little bit differently. And as I mentioned earlier, OIG has direct access to program officials, where GAO works through the audit liaisons. So I know our AFCs and liaisons are both very familiar with this process, but I know we have a lot of program officials on the line as well. And I think this is important to know how the process flows. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes here. So initially we receive an audit notification, and that's really just a formal written memo from the organization, the auditing organization, announcing an upcoming audit and describing the scope. OIG will call it an audit a project. GAO calls it an engagement, but really they're coming to audit us either way. So once we receive that, it's distributed to the program offices, or OIG may distribute it directly to them to begin with. And then we have what's called an entrance conference. And it's really just a lofty name for a kickoff meeting. It's the first phase of field work. And that's coordinated between either the AFC or the GAO liaison and whoever is running the audit for GAO or OIG. And that initial meeting is an opportunity to discuss the scope, timeframes, and who else may be participating in the audit. So with GAO engagements, sometimes these audits are government-wide. There may be 20, 30 other organizations that are participating in the same audit, or sometimes it's just about EPA specifically. With a GAO engagement, we also have a requirement for a strategy session, and really that's just an internal meeting to help identify sensitivities, highlight key efforts, and agree on processes for review and meetings. And then we move into the fieldwork. So that's the substance of the audit. That's the interviews, the questions, the data calls. Many of you who are subject matter experts have probably participated in this portion most frequently. This is probably what you're familiar with. So with OIG, we respond to those inquiries as they come. GAO can be a little more complicated. It's coordinated through the liaisons, OCIR and OGC. May want to review. They may want to sit in on some of those meetings as well. So once that field work concludes, and that can go on for months, in some cases it can even go on for years, but eventually it does conclude. And we get a discussion document or a statement of facts. And essentially those are the same thing. Those are documents that share findings and recommendations and provides an opportunity. It's really kind of an early sneak preview, if you will, of what the auditor is going to say. So we have an opportunity to take a look at that. With OIG, we have 15 days to respond, and that can be either verbal or written. It's a little bit different with GAO. They provide it shortly before we have an exit conference and gives an opportunity to take a look at that. And the written response is determined at the exit conference. So in the case of IG, we'll receive a draft report next, and then within 30 days, EPA is required to respond to that draft report. And then we move into an exit conference. So the exit conference is an opportunity to review the findings and recommendations, discuss inaccuracies, and it's really key to the process because it's an opportunity to discuss how EPA is going to implement recommendations, and it's also the opportunity to gain a common understanding with auditors of what constitutes completion. So, that's really this really key moment, and I want to emphasize this because if we get a bad recommendation, and when I say a bad recommendation, I mean something that we're not able to implement, it can linger out there for a very long time. So whatever we do needs to be implementable, and that's a conversation to have at the exit conference. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but I did want to throw that out there. So with GAO, we received the draft report after the exit conference, and again, 30 days to respond. So that response to a draft report is something that's coordinated through office leadership. They need to sign off. And in the case of GAO, the responses are reviewed by OCIR and OGC before submission. So following that, we'll receive the final report and corrective actions. Those final reports are published on OIG and GAO websites, and they're public documents. And we'll show you when we get to our new Sharepoint site where the link is for that, because all of those reports are accessible to you. If sensitive information is included, the reports can be redacted or summaries posted in place of full reports. And those reports identify OIG or GAO's final position, and it includes a copy of EPA's response to the draft report. So that's kind of an important point there. It's our opportunity when we submit the response to share EPA's position, and it's sort of a rebuttal if it's been a contentious situation. So that's just a brief overview, obviously. We do have to go ahead and look at corrective actions and report back to GAO and OIG once it all concludes, but we'll take a look at that part in the next slide here. So corrective actions. Audit reports, as we mentioned earlier, may contain recommendations for EPA, and ideally they're to improve our operations or ensure that we're complying with laws and regulations. And that's really the whole purpose of the audit. So we're required to develop corrective actions and to implement those recommendations. And whether it's OIG or GAO, the audit is considered resolved and closed only once all of those recommendations and corrective actions have been completed. So it just kind of lingers out there until we take that action and close it out. AFCs and liaisons track those corrective actions, monitor progress toward completion dates. But as I mentioned earlier, when we look here at tips and considerations for corrective actions, this part is absolutely critical. If the actions are not reasonable and feasible to implement, they can linger out there for years, and it's never good for them to linger for long periods of time, primarily because the intent can be overcome by events, but also it can bring some very negative publicity to the organization. So this is where we'd like to talk with you all. I know this is an area that a number of our offices have really been focusing on recently, ways to write good corrective actions, as well as ways to get them closed out, like that communication with auditors. So what we'd like for you to do is take a moment to share some of your best practices with corrective actions. You can just type them there in the chat box. And while you're thinking of that, Andrew and I have a couple of thoughts as to some good practices, but I don't know if yeah, I see we still have some of our AFCs and liaisons here. Some of them have been closing out recommendations for many years, so please go ahead and share them in the Q&A box there that Nikki's just posted. Andrew, did you want to share a couple of your thoughts about corrective actions?
Sure. Something to keep in mind is to set reasonable and realistic timeframes when thinking about when the corrective action will be implemented, because those are being measured and become part of the bowling chart metrics. Another suggestion would be to keep the corrective action language short and concise, and to really make sure it's addressing the corrective action, the recommendation, I'm sorry. And if possible, one can even parrot the recommendation language when developing the corrective action language.
And I see we're getting some responses from the group. Janet says she requires her program offices to set due dates no longer than 3 years out and specify the month and year for completion. She also requires a document to prove completion. I think she raises a really good point there, because auditors are not just going to accept that, when you call and say, yes, we've completed things. No, they're going to want to see proof. So I think that's a really great point. Then I see here, Dharmic, set deadlines and ensure follow through. So just again, they're echoing that same sort of theme of, follow through, setting deadlines. If these things linger out there, as we mentioned earlier, it's just not good. That's how people end up, testifying in front of Congress about why things are still open. I've been meeting recently with several of our program offices, the Office of the Administrator, Office of Water, Janet's office as well, talking with folks about how to close things out. There's a misconception that, that there's not really a deadline with GAO, that we can wait 4 years before we close things out, but that's simply not a best practice. We want to get those things closed out before 4 years when they're most effective. Let's see. Leslie says, at my previous agency, I worked with OIG financial statements audits. One practice was that a person or persons is responsible to monitor the recommendations that were being filed and completed. And I think she raises another good point in that having someone that is responsible for the recommendation, assigning an owner to it, that can be very, very helpful. Janet mentions monthly audit progress meetings to discuss corrective actions. And I think that brings up another thing, alerting management if things are delayed. Having your leadership involved early and often to ensure that people receive funding, that you have the manpower to complete it. And also that leadership awareness, that can enable you, if you run into some problems, to have that top cover when you go to meet with GAO or OIG. If you don't have the money, if you don't have the manpower, if it's no longer practical, sometimes it's just a good idea to meet with the auditor, have that open line of communication and say, this really isn't working out. And sometimes they'll be willing to work with you on that if they can see all the work that you've put in behind that. See, Janet says, I also brief our AA every week on audits generally and what will be coming up from signature. Managing expectations, keeping leadership involved. These are all great ideas. Michael says the AO has a weekly or biweekly meeting with key leaders, acting deputy chief of staff. So again, that leadership involvement. So I think everyone gets the idea. Thanks to everyone for sharing those thoughts. I think this is something where collectively the organization can improve, and I know it's something that's been a real emphasis for Andrew and I recently. So we appreciate the input. And again, this session is being recorded, so if you don't remember some of these, certainly you can come back and take a look, and we can all work toward getting these things closed out.
Fantastic, thank you, Sue. I'll do a quick update on Eems, the Enterprise Audit Management System. Many of you are aware that it's under development on the OIG side. It will eventually replace MATS, but it will track audits from the project notification phase all the way through to the final report. So that's in development currently, and there'll be system testing and there'll be training before that gets fully deployed. On the GAO side, the Eems Phase 1 was already rolled out in November of 2019, and there was training that was held for the GAO side back in the summer of 2019. We're looking at doing some refresher training for folks to encourage use of the system and to help with familiarity. So look out for that in the future. And really the purpose of having a centralized audit tracking system is to make sure that all of the information goes into one place. Currently different offices have different mechanisms of keeping track of audit information, some on spreadsheets, others in databases, and so having a really good central repository of information will just help everybody's job, make it easier for us, and eliminate redundant reporting. With that, we can skip to the next slide. And I'll talk about monthly metrics and reporting. We'll talk about this more on the Sharepoint site, but on the 4th of every month, OCFO reports out on open corrective actions for the OIG and GAO audits. Today actually is the 4th, so we'll be reporting out on the activity through the end of May. So we do log into the, for me on the OIG side, I log into MATS, run the late corrective action report, and just see where offices are. As a reminder, it's the planned date, the original planned date, that is the trigger for a corrective action being late. So even if a due date is extended, unfortunately that still counts as late if that original date has lapsed. So offices certainly correspond with me and let me know when maybe some information isn't correct, and so I work with them in correcting the entry into MATS, and this information all feeds into EPA's bowling charts. So that's the importance of this. And on the and just to introduce real quick the Audit Tracker, the OIG and GAO Audit Tracker. For those of you who are AFCs and liaisons, you already know about this, but it's an effort by the Administrator's Office to try to stay informed of audits early in the audit process, not waiting until the final report, but really to have awareness of what's going on in the initial stages of each audit. So OCFO has worked with the Administrator's Office to develop this tool, and on the first Friday of every month, we ask that AFCs and liaisons update that SharePoint site with their information. and that just helps keeps the administrator informed, the AAs and regional administrators informed of what's going on. I'll turn it back over to Sue.
All right, so the OIG GAO Audit Community Sharepoint site, we were really excited to roll this out last month. It was developed in response to feedback we heard from AFCs and GAO liaisons. It consolidates the resources we've developed to assist the audit community. And I think it's particularly helpful for new liaisons and subject matter experts that might be newly involved in an audit. If you remember one thing from the training today, please remember that we have a SharePoint site and you can always come to it as a starting point. The new site serves as a single location for resources, reference materials for AFCs and liaisons. It has templates, SOPs, information on reporting deadlines, some frequently asked questions. We're still building out that part. And so we're going to be going over to the site and touching on each of these areas in a little more detail. But as I mentioned, it's new, so if you have feedback or suggested additions, please let us know. We definitely view this as an evolving area, and we want it to be useful to you. So along those lines, we're just curious as to who has visited the SharePoint site so far. So I think Nikki has a poll. I promise this is our last poll, but we really do want to know. So okay, so there we go. I've got 3 options. Yes, it's awesome, which I encourage you to check. No, not yet. Or wait, there's an audit SharePoint site. So please go ahead and check the box that applies to you. All right, I think we can go ahead and close the poll. And Andrew, since I toggled over, I can't see the poll anymore. So if you can share what the results are.
Okay. Yes, it's awesome. Had 16 votes for about 27%. Not yet. That's about 37% for 23 votes. And wait, there's an audit SharePoint site. Same amount, 23 votes for 37%.
Wonderful. Well, this is the audit SharePoint site. Hopefully you can see that. And it is located on the OCFO SharePoint within the Office of the Controller. And this is a link that we'll certainly share with you after and make sure that you all have it. But again, within the OCFO Office of Controller. So here at the top, we've got these 2 documents that we mentioned earlier, EPA Manual 2750. That includes the detailed explanation of how to handle different types of audits, from performance audits to financial statement audits to single audits. Assistance agreement audits, it's a great resource. Performance audits are the most common, and there's great information in the manual about response time frames, role of the AFC, and defining how the process works. And also included is a link to the 1-page OIG Audit Process Map, which shows an overview of how the audit process flows. We'll take a quick look at that. I hope. Yep, there we go. So you can see here, these are all available to you, but it's an available resource for folks to get an overview of the process. The whole manual will be hard to sit down and digest in one read, but this provides a quick snapshot of that. Similarly, under the audit management procedures for GAO audits is the SOP guidance document that we talked about earlier. roles and responsibilities for the OCFO Audit Liaison team, as well as the lead regional program office liaison at each step in the audit process that we discussed earlier. And the guidance includes reminders for updating Eems throughout the process. Just want to take a moment to mention Eems. It's still kind of new to us all. I know it was down for a while after it rolled out in November, so we're all getting reacclimated to it. But I strongly encourage you to be reporting things in Eems as you go throughout the audit process. And also a process map and links to Eems training are included in that document.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Just a quick overview of EPA guidance documents there. We have on the GAO audit process, we have the SOP that Sue mentioned earlier. We have some information on the OIG, EPA Directive 6500. That is a voluminous document that really gets into the history and statutory authorizations of the OIG, gets into, so probably a lot more about the IG than you ever want to know, but that is available. We also have a memo from the OIG that was recently issued in April that goes through their audit process. It talks about their time frames for audits and valuations, for how they manage the corrective action process and their obligations vis-a-vis EPA. So that's a helpful document to know about. And also an OCFO policy blitz that we issued in February that talks about evaluations in particular. That's a new product that the OIG has been doing in the past year or so. They really want to turn around. It's authorized by the Blue Book, these evaluations, and the OIG wants a process by which they can move a little quicker and narrow the scope of their audit work. So you've probably heard maybe about some evaluations, and this is just some information about evaluations. Principally, no discussion document and the draft report that's due within the response to the draft report that's due within 21 days instead of 30 days.
So the next section there is government-wide guidance documents, and I just noticed the time. I want to make sure that we save a few minutes for questions at the end. So I won't go too deeply into these. They're a little bit dry and in the weeds, but they're also the foundational documents for all things audit. So Yellow Book, Blue Book, they're guidance put out by the GAO and used as the standards for conducting performance audits, as well as inspections and evaluations. That's the Blue Book there that Andrew mentioned. These are commonly accepted standards. If an auditor says they're following GAS or GAGAS, this is what they're referring to, is the Yellow Book there. OIG Act of 1978. This gives the OIG the authority to audit and outlines their independence. And then OMB Circular number A50 just talks about audits generally and the responsibilities of each agency.
Okay, thanks, Sue. And for the next topic, metrics and reporting, we've already started talking about this, so I won't spend a whole lot more time here. Again, it's just a monthly report that OCFO owes, reporting on the audit activity for OIG and GAO as far as the late corrective actions metric goes. So just a reminder, today is the 4th actually, so we'll be reporting it out today, but at the end of the month to go into MATS, make sure that all of the correct and accurate information is put in there, and Eems for the GAO side currently, and then we work also on the Audit Tracker. We request that monthly updates be performed on the first Friday of each month, just to make sure that each office and region has all of their latest and updated audit information available for tracking purposes, for communication, and for metric reporting. And with that, I'll turn it back to
Eems. We mentioned Eems earlier, our Enterprise Audit Management System. This rolled out for GAO audits back in November of 2019. We're working on the OIG portion now. It is a little bit different from what we used previously, Lotus Notes for GAO and MATS for OIG. So there's a slight learning curve, but you'll see here that we've got several resources included. There's the Eems user manual. That's actually located in the Eems system as well. We also have Eems training slides in there. And we got some feedback about the titles of the training, went back in and adjusted those, so hopefully it's a little more intuitive when you click on the links. But we definitely encourage our GAO liaisons to go in and start using Eems. Ideally, the status report from the Office of the Administrator that Andrew mentioned under metrics and reporting, the need to go in there each month and update that will be eliminated once we have Eems up on both sides. So that's why we'd really encourage our GAO folks to start updating that now. Once the IG portion is on, it will automatically populate that spreadsheet, we hope. I'm sure there will be a couple of bumps initially, but that is the objective. So great resource here. There's a Skype training video that we got hold of and posted yesterday. So if your training was a year ago and you want to take another look and have a refresher, that's there for you.
Great, thanks, Sue. And just some quick links that we have to the audit report section. If you ever want to go and look for a particular OIG audit, you can click a link there, EPA OIG reports, and same for GAO reports. These go back many, many years, so one can go peruse the available audits out there directly on their websites. And also we maintain a point of contact list. Well, we've got individuals within OCFO that one can contact for any follow-up questions related to audit work, and we also maintain a POC list with all of the AFCs and liaisons to help you know who each other are, and if another office can help you out with something, don't hesitate to ask your counterpart in another office. So Sue's opening that right now here for folks to take a look at. And we do keep this updated. Go ahead, Sue. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. I think this is an important resource for people, especially if you're a subject matter expert that's involved in an audit, or you get a random email from an auditor and don't know what to do about it. You can come to this site, take a look here, and say, "Oh, I'm in OICA and I got a call from GAO. I should call Luan." So, great spot to start, but certainly, Andrew and I are available as well. I just wanted to make sure I pulled that up so people could see what's in there, and we keep this updated as personnel change. Anything else on here that you wanted to touch on, Andrew? I know we have frequently asked questions there, as well as some tools and templates. As we get more templates, we plan to update that section. Frequently asked questions. When someone reaches out to me with a question, if I hear it more than once, I add it to the frequently asked questions. So, we want to be responsive to you. But again, if you have ideas, thoughts for additional resources, please reach out to either of us. We definitely want this to be a useful resource.
Yeah, thank you. I guess we can take questions at this point if there are outstanding questions. Oh, and while we're waiting on that, Aileen just mentioned a reminder for OIG audit follow-up coordinators that there was an email sent out yesterday requesting some information by the end of today regarding any OIG audits related to COVID activity. Any COVID-related OIG audits, just to help keep us informed of what may be happening on that front, because it seems like the OIG will be initiating a number of audits related to that particular issue.
All right, and I see Unji there just asked for access to the Audit Sharepoint site. I need to take a look at that because everyone should have access. So if it's not publicly open, we'll take a look at that. How do we know, except for the notice, or can we anticipate when an audit may be coming? That's a good question. I do get alerts from various news outlets about upcoming engagements. It can be a little bit tough to tell, though, when somebody is going to roll something out. Just because they've talked about it in Congress or you see it in the news doesn't necessarily mean that one of the auditing entities is going to have the capacity to do that. But certainly right now, we know COVID is coming. When there's a lot of money allocated to something, that's when we definitely know audits are coming. But certainly if you see, any of you see articles on things related to EPA where officials have stated that they're going to initiate an audit, send that my way, because we definitely like to keep everybody posted. And Janet mentioned OIG also watches trade press for hot issues and does an annual plan. When I was at DHS OIG, one of the things that we talked about how our annual plan was a list of things that we never got to. So it can be a great way to, anticipate what OIG will be doing, but it's not necessarily, what they will be doing. So, and GAO does a similar thing. They have an annual plan. Both organizations have statutory obligations, and those are things that you know that they will hit every year. I mentioned CARES Act earlier. They have obligations there. There are other acts that have similar requirements.
We know about the annual financial statement audit, for example, on the OCFO side. Other types of audits that are statutorily required that just have to be done every year. No flexibility by the agency or the OIG on those. It's just something that's required by law. So there are a number of those in different agency programs that are recurring audits every year, every couple of years.
See, any other questions? Let's see here. We spoke briefly about the OCIR, OGC, OP involvement in the review process. I think it would be helpful to the community if someone could lay out this new review process. For example, timeframes for review, when we should expect to receive a response. Do some audits take priority in the review process than others? I've experienced sending items over for review and not receive a response return. When I did, it was still under review. Yeah, you raise a great point, Michael. So for GAO engagements, the memo from the Chief Financial Officer earlier this year, outlined some of the responsibilities for OCIR, OGC, but not the timeframes. So one of the things that we've been trying to build in with the strategy session is to receive some kind of commitment from offices that are reviewing the documents regarding timeframes. And I realize that can be very, very frustrating. The problem right now is that the volume of documentation and the number of hot topics has sort of reached critical mass, so they are running behind. And that's something that OCFO has met with OCIR and OGC about. Leadership from OC was involved in that discussion, and they've made a commitment to communicate. But what that means right now, I'm not really sure. So that's still an evolving area. It's definitely something we're aware of, and it's definitely something we're prioritizing.
Hey, Sue, we have a hard cutoff at 2 o'clock for this training due to tech support. So I do see there are a number of questions that are still coming in the chat box. We may just have to address those individually. As if folks want to contact myself, Andrew LeBlanc, or you, Sue, for further conversations about some of these issues and topics, we're certainly happy to do that. I think we need to, and we can set up a follow-up email with some additional information and maybe some answers to some of these questions as we're seeing them pop up. But we'll need to bring an end to the recording right now. So if there are any final thoughts that any of the hosts have, or Any last items that we need to address before signing off? Please let us know now. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending this. Yeah. Thank you everybody for attending this training. Hope you got something out of it. You know, the AFCs and the audit community. We were hoping to give you some new tools and resources that you can use to make your job easier. And then for folks who are just interested in audit, wanting to learn more, we hope you're able to take something away from this and use that in case your work becomes auditable in the future. But with that, we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your participation.